Good morning, dear friends. My name is Igor Yakovenko. It's 7:42 a.m. in Kiev right now. Today is April 14th, and we continue our now morning reflections on what is happening in Russia, in the world, in Ukraine, and in our souls. First, let us consider a few words about the significant consequences of that monumental victory achieved by the opposition this past Sunday, which successfully overthrew the regime. This marks the end of the Orban regime. At the very least, the outlines of the new Hungary have become clear. Just how new this vision will be, and how fundamentally it is going to differ from Orban's Hungary. But the recent speech by Peter Magyar, which took place yesterday, clarifies something. To begin with, what I truly believe will capture the interest of the vast majority of our audience today is the fact that Magyar, in a move that was quite predictable to many observers, has officially promised that he will not take any steps to block the European Union's massive €90 billion financial aid loan package. At the same time, also predictably, he stated that Budapest does not plan to participate in allocating the funds. At the official press conference that took place yesterday afternoon, he said that he offered a justification for his actions. He explained further that supposedly they had previously promised not to block it and that he would honor and fulfill his previous promise. So basically, regarding the fact that Hungary is not going to be participating in guaranteeing this loan, well, that was also entirely expected. He specifically pointed out the critical fact that we cannot, and that Hungary simply cannot afford to take on even more loans, especially since the Hungarian budget deficit has increased by more than 3 times its original size since 2010. So, in addition to this, and as many had already expected, he explicitly stated that he is very hopeful about unblocking those vital European Union funds. These funds, which, according to my current understanding, amount to approximately €35 billion, will hopefully also be unblocked very soon. In the very near future, he plans to sit down and discuss this matter in detail with Ursula von der Leyen. Furthermore, according to a report by the Financial Times, the European Commission has already officially begun engaging in detailed discussions with the Hungarian government regarding the unblocking of €35 billion in funding. This means that the specific portion of the financial aid that Hungary needs has already begun the process of being released immediately. As for the specific diplomatic steps on Hungary's part that will lead to, first of all, the unblocking of the €90 billion financial aid package for Ukraine and the lifting of the veto on the upcoming 20th comprehensive package of sanctions against Russia. Well, apparently this still is not going to be resolved as quickly as many had hoped. So, today we have a new poll running on our channel. I'm interested in your opinion. In just a few minutes, we will publish the results of this poll. Therefore, the European leadership in Brussels, at this very moment in time, understanding that most likely the new Hungarian government will finally decide to lift its long-standing veto on allocating a massive sum of €90 billion to Ukraine, has already begun extensive preparations to provide this critical loan to Ukraine. So that immediately, as soon as Mane officially takes office, these critical and necessary financial operations could be carried out because indeed time is of the essence. Ukraine is in a very difficult situation without this money. Regarding the other statements, everything else is also entirely predictable. So there are talks about the rule of law, about fighting corruption, and here, regarding the matter of Orban's future, there are 2 distinct positions outlined in the statement. In Mader's statement yesterday, the first point is that significant amendments will be implemented to the Constitution, and this is something to watch. The Madar government will be fully capable of doing this, especially since they currently possess a strong constitutional majority. As I understand the situation, they hold approximately 69% of the total seats in parliament, which clearly means they have a solid constitutional majority and the power to amend the constitution. And first of all, these upcoming amendments will be directly related to the fact that the specific position of prime minister is going to be changed, should be limited to 2 terms. So this essentially means that Orban will no longer be able to run for any political office. In other words, there was an immediate and decisive, so to speak, blocking of Orban's further actions as an opposition politician. And as for another very important thing to consider, it is really about what the future holds for the political landscape and the stability of the region. When it comes to the matter of the prosecution of Orban for his alleged criminal activities, that is, about his future fate, Madar stated during the interview, and I will quote exactly what he said, "It is not the business of the Prime Minister's politics to decide whether a former head of government should go to prison. Our task is to ensure the independence of investigative bodies and justice. Issues of corruption will be investigated by the National Asset Recovery Office and the protection of national property. So, the distinct possibility that Orban will go to prison certainly does exist, but at the very least, Madar stated that he personally will not pursue Orban." Now, turning our attention to the complex diplomatic relations with the 2 specific heads of state who supported Orban, most notably Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump as well, then it was clearly stated during the proceedings here that Madar himself does not intend to call either of those individuals to testify. "If Putin calls, I will pick up the phone and urge him to stop the war." As for Trump, he said that he does not intend to call Trump. Well, naturally, relations with the United States of America will have to be properly maintained. One particularly significant stance being taken is that Madar will continue to cultivate and maintain diplomatic and economic relations with Russia concerning the ongoing purchase of energy resources. Well, in fact, it was hard to expect anything else, but in any case, Madar will certainly no longer be seen as a mere subordinate or lackey for Vladimir Putin. Well, a crucial and important point to consider is that Madar has the explicit intention to declassify all the secret agreements between Russia and Hungary, which also in general serves as a strong guarantee that Hungary will no longer be such a Trojan horse in the European Union and NATO. This is an important thing. When discussing the future of diplomatic relations with Ukraine, Madar explicitly stated that he fully intends to schedule a meeting with President Zelensky. However, he also noted that it is highly unlikely that these bilateral relations will be simple or easy to manage. This is primarily because, on the one hand, the official position has been clearly established. It was formally stated that Russia is the primary aggressor in this conflict, while Ukraine remains the clear victim of this ongoing external aggression. And every single statement that was made during the election campaign carried out by Viktor Orban with his constant attacks on Ukraine, all was called completely outrageous, deeply hypocritical, and utter nonsense. Well, as for the situation regarding diplomatic relations with Ukraine, here some, well, I would say certain ritual words were spoken about the undeniable fact that a preliminary condition for normalizing relations with Ukraine will be the resolution of the rights of the Hungarian minority. There are likely going to be some significant difficulties here, but in any case, the most important thing to consider is that the issue of allocating 90 billion euros is finally resolved. This is probably the most important and concrete issue at hand. Well, at least there is hope for this. Today, we are going to take a look to find out exactly what you think about the specific timing of this allocation, because it is clear that sooner or later this issue will be resolved. The question is when. The timing here is crucial. So, I am moving on to the central topic of our conversation today. And this topic is, it would seem to be peripheral, a private matter. I want to say right away that I will not touch on it. Today, in our morning stream, the question is about what is happening in the Middle East. This is, of course, very important. The primary reason I am able to refrain from touching on this specific topic during our broadcast this morning is because we have a very important and detailed meeting scheduled for later this evening. At 7 p.m. sharp, we are going to have an in depth live conversation with the renowned Israeli military expert David Sharp. I am already well aware that his professional position, at least as far as I have seen and understood, is somewhat different from the one I have just presented to you here. In our upcoming conversations, it will be incredibly interesting and highly valuable to look at this complex situation specifically through the experienced eyes of such a prominent Israeli military expert. I specifically invited him to join us today on purpose, because it is absolutely crucial for all of us not to stay trapped in our own information bubble, but to try to step outside of it and carefully examine the current situation. This includes looking at it from a completely different and unique perspective. So today we are going to have a very interesting conversation. I am not going to debate with him, but I want to present another point of view on the events in the Middle East and on Trump's position. All right. At this moment, I would like to take some time to discuss a highly unusual and peculiar set of actions that Donald Trump has been frequently taking over the past few weeks. This is something quite remarkable. It appears to be a completely and utterly irrational and illogical position from Trump. When discussing the historical figure of Pope Leo XIV, a person whom he famously referred to as perceived as being quite weak on various crime issues, he nonetheless took full credit for his recent victory in the election. Well, and generally speaking, he reacted in a very intense and emotional way to his personal circumstances, to his position. So, I am not planning to spend time right now to separately discuss all of those highly unusual and bizarre images that Donald Trump has been frequently posting on his personal social media platform created through the use of artificial intelligence. For instance, first he shared a depiction of himself as the Pope, and then he even shared one as Jesus Christ, who he heals the infirm and cures those who are sick. Well, to speak quite frankly and honestly about the matter, for believers, I don't know, so to speak, in the United States of America, as one might naturally expect to find in any normal country, there is no criminal prosecution for offending the feelings of believers. But in Russia, Trump would certainly have faced serious criminal charges and prosecution under that specific article. Well, it's good that there isn't. So, from what position was this attack launched? So Trump stated, I don't want a pope who thinks it's normal for Iran to have nuclear weapons. I don't want a pope who thinks it's terrible that America attacked Venezuela. I don't want a pope who criticizes the President of the United States for what I do. Exactly what I was elected for. So, the primary accusations leveled against Louis XIV are that he is excessively weak when it comes to crime, and deeply flawed regarding his foreign policy. These are, so to speak, the main accusations brought against him. In addition, Trump publicly accused the Pope of actively flirting with the ideologies of the radical left, and he also strongly advised the pontiff not to get involved in politics. And besides everything else, of course, he said that the Pope, Leo XIII, should be grateful to him, Trump, for the fact that he was even elected at all. He specifically stated that he wasn't even on the list of candidates. He was put there only because he is an American, and in the Vatican, all officials believed that this was the most effective strategy to deal with Trump. If it weren't for me being in the White House, Leo XIV would not have ended up in the Vatican. And then, when journalists questioned him extensively about the reasons why he was doing all this, he said that the Pope was performing his duties quite poorly and even suggested that Leo XIV actually has a certain fondness for criminal activities. After that, he was asked, this was already yesterday, he was asked whether he was going to apologize, and he replied that he had absolutely no intention whatsoever of offering an apology, insisting that the Pope was completely in the wrong. To put it simply, he persistently continued his offensive against the Roman Pope. The consequences. This is the most significant aspect of the situation. First of all, even those politicians who supported Trump spoke out against him in a public way. Already, they have expressed negative attitudes toward these actions. Giorgia Meloni, who is widely recognized as a prominent and steadfast defender of Donald Trump within Europe, recently stated that she personally finds Trump's words regarding the Holy Father to be completely unacceptable, and she further emphasized that it is entirely natural and expected for the Pope to call for global peace and to firmly condemn the tragedy of war. But she is truly the singular figure among prominent European heads of state who, Meloni was present. She is the only European leader who attended Trump's inauguration and has always consistently been his supporter. But when we look at the current situation, apparently there has been a very significant shift in the mood of Italians. Because according to the latest data, 66% of Italians have a decidedly negative opinion of the US president now. And that is exactly why she decided that maintaining a positive attitude was necessary. Trump is actually toxic. Donald Trump has become increasingly toxic on the global political stage, and even his most steadfast and loyal supporters, like Italy's Giorgia Meloni, are now starting to carefully and strategically distance themselves from him. In addition, in Italy, there is another former Trump supporter, a deeply like-minded ideological ally, Matteo Salvini, who, as they often say, is not just a vocal supporter of Trump, but also a true and unwavering believer in the core tenets of his movement. A fan of Putin. And now Salvini has also publicly voiced his opposition to Trump, because it is his firm and deeply considered belief that these persistent and public attacks on the current Pope appear to be extremely counterproductive to the achievement of their own goals. In order to ensure that I do not come across as some kind of apologist, I still feel it is necessary to say that the position of Leo XIV also appears to be considerably distant from being entirely flawless. Unlike Donald Trump, I'm not currently campaigning or running for any kind of political office. So, in general terms, I more or less do not particularly find myself concerned with how Catholics might feel about this situation. That is why I want to say that the position of Leo XIV definitely appears to be far from being flawless. This is because both his repeated calls for peace and his criticism of what is happening in the Middle East only suddenly and conspicuously emerged right when the military attacks against Iran first began, which raises significant questions about the timing of his message. I have not yet heard, maybe correct me in the comments, dear friends, if I am mistaken, but I have not yet heard any strong statements on this matter. A statement from Leo Positnov regarding the unfolding attacks on Israel. This is a rather peculiar one-sided position. In other words, attacking Iran is not allowed, but attacking Israel, it turns out, is acceptable. Well, when we look at the situation in a general sense, there really are some legitimate and justifiable elements of fairness in the public criticisms voiced by Donald Trump that Leo XIV is actively playing up to the preferences of the left. Well, perhaps that could be said. That's another question. It's one thing It is one thing when a publicist like someone in my position does this, and quite another when it's unclear why the sitting president of the United States of America would do it. After all, politics is a somewhat different kind of activity than professional journalism. In this sense, I am much freer than any politician. I have the opportunity and the right, and there is a deeply rooted and rational sense in me offering criticism toward anyone at all. It is certainly present within me. But as for politicians, they still have to carefully weigh the potential consequences of their actions. So, let me remind you that the full-scale coordinated attack on the Vatican actually first began right there at the White House, not with Trump. It was the Deputy Secretary of War who personally invited the Papal Nuncio to his office. and so to speak, he proceeded to give him a very stern and formal dressing down. Among those present at this dressing down were people who they reminded us about the Avignon papacy, the captivity in Avignon. The famous episode when the French king Philip the Fair, after quarreling with the Roman Pope, the Pope, first arranged for his murder and then, well, installed his own puppet, dragged him onto French territory, and for several years, the Roman Pope was essentially a puppet of the French king. This is the kind of episode from history that was recalled, was remembered during the review of the personal case of Leo XIV in the office of the Deputy Minister of War. That's it. Now, if we look at the broader context, this is an entirely distinct and separate story, which actually took place well before Trump's attack on Leo XIV. Actually, all the highly controversial rhetoric of Donald Trump and his cabinet, it definitely incites a profound sense of outrage among believers. Because, at least among Catholics, because when the Secretary of War, Kekset, calls on Americans to pray for victory in battle in the name of Jesus Christ, it generally looks rather strange and deeply unsettling to many people. That is, it's a bit reminiscent of the actions of the satanic totalitarian sect of the Russian Orthodox Church, which tries to bless weapons, including the Satan missile, and, so to speak, completely takes the side of this war that Russia is waging in Ukraine. So, the specific nature of Donald Trump's political rhetoric itself, of course, and his repeated and aggressive calls to completely destroy Iranian civilization, and his various threats to blow up bridges and power plants, all of these factors, without any shadow of a doubt, are not just about actions, they are fundamentally about rhetoric. This undoubtedly causes a profound sense of internal resistance and opposition among a very large number of people. So, in general, mocking religion, or otherwise, to somehow explain the fact that Trump portrays himself in the image of Jesus Christ, these are, rather strange actions for a politician who, is planning. Personally, he clearly isn't going to run for anything, but at the very least, to somehow preserve the electorate for his party in general, from the standpoint of common sense, that would be the right thing to do. Trump is now actively taking steps, doing everything he can in order to catastrophically lose the upcoming elections, the critical midterm elections to Congress on November 3rd of this year. So let's just take a moment to examine the detailed numbers regarding exactly what is happening. There is data from research centers in the United States of America that in the presidential elections of 2024, the majority of Catholic voters supported Trump. That is, a total of 55% of Catholics supported Trump compared to approximately 43 for Kamala Harris. Catholics, I don't remember the exact number right now, but I think it's about 1 out of every 5 people of Americans who are Catholics, among the entire adult population in the country. And besides that, a significant portion of them are Latin Americans, who are one of the fastest growing ethnic groups in the United States and who play a huge role in the swing states. That is to say, the electoral weight and influence of Catholics is higher than their proportional share of the total population of the United States. That is Arizona, Florida. These are, so to speak, states where there is a high, relatively increased weight of the Catholic population, primarily Latino. And what Donald Trump is doing right now regarding the Pope substantially heightens the overall chances that Latino Catholics will completely pull back their political support from the Republicans. And this will most likely lead to a very dramatic and consequential shift in the current situation. That is, well, let's put it this way. What Trump is doing right now, well, it's really like essentially shooting the entire Republican Party right in the back. His defiant stance of setting himself directly against the Pope, well, really, throughout the long history of the Vatican, there have been several notable episodes when someone boldly set themselves against the reigning Pope and even called themselves, the true Pope, so to speak, in direct opposition to the current head of the Vatican. And, well, the history of anti-papacy clearly shows that such movements have almost always ended in failure. That is, for example, Natalius, the first antipope was Natalius. This was in the 3rd century. And the result of this situation was that he was compelled to renounce his position. And basically, the man ended his career by finally stopping his long fight against the authority of the Pope. The very last one to resist was Felix V, who also tried to claim the role of the Pope for himself. In the end, well, in his case, things weren't quite so catastrophic. This was the 15th century, and there, as far as I understand, a compromise was reached. He was allowed to remain within the Catholic Church, though I believe only as a bishop. But in the end, after a long and difficult period, he eventually gave up his struggle. So, ultimately, there was no real success story to be found for the anti-popes in history. That is exactly why I do not think that an attempt to fight against the institution of Catholicism, against Catholicism itself, will end in any kind of success for Trump. So, in reality, what can one really say about such a situation? I have remarked on more than one occasion that the most precise and fitting characterization of Donald Trump is the simple word fool. Unfortunately, I find myself compelled to use this specific term once again in order to somehow characterize this peculiar and entirely unprovoked strategic attempt to create yet another unnecessary anti-Vatican front within the complex politics of the current president and leader of the United States of America. Looking at the big picture, I think it's a positive development because it boosts the likelihood of Donald Trump losing control of not just the House, which he's already lost, but the Senate as well. So what does that mean? Applause. Bravo, Trump. Onward to complete failure at the elections on November 3rd. If that scenario actually unfolds, the distinct and significant probability that Trump will have almost no time or focus for foreign policy during the second part of his term is extremely high and likely. And overall, that's actually a good thing. Before we finally wrap up our conversation for now, I want to say right away, just to warn you well in advance, that today's morning stream is going to be rather short. Well, that's primarily because today I really have to take care of some other important personal matters that aren't directly related to our channel at all. But later this evening at 7 o'clock sharp, I highly recommend joining the live conversation with David Sharp. It should be a great session. Great. Once again, I want to say that it's very important for us to look at the situation from different perspectives, including through the eyes of an Israeli expert. And now, I would like to take a moment to present to you the full results of our recent poll. So the specific question we posed to the public was as follows. Do you think that after a significant change of government in Hungary, a formal decision will be made to grant Ukraine a loan of 90 billion euros by June 1st? The specific forecast for a yes outcome will be considered correct if, by midnight on May 31st, the European Union is officially in a position to begin taking concrete and decisive actions by transferring the first tranche to Ukraine drawn directly from this total allocated amount. And well, I should also mention that I personally took the time to record the final results at the exact moment when there were 870 people voting. As you can see the results on the screen right now, the answer yes received a total of 83%. The answer no received 7%, and the remaining 10% of people found it quite difficult to answer.